Welcome to the MYBcast, a channel offering podcasts devoted to the art and science of somatic touch therapy. Somatic touch therapy is an alternative for self-care that recognizes the important role the body plays in our day-to-day life. We are fascinated with the mind-body connection, and so are the people we talk with. From pioneers who helped to originate or develop this work, to seedlings of somatic mindfulness who have adopted principles of this work in their massage practices, our guests will uplift, educate, and inspire you. Thanks for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and share. Now let's join our hosts.
Welcome, everyone, to Season 3 of Portraits of the Pioneers. I'm Anna Marie Bowers, and I'm here with my co-host, Richard Mack. Good morning, Richard. I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our guest for today.
Thank you, Anna Marie. And we're very, very excited to start the new season off with a very near and dear friend of ours. And for me, my first Traeger instructor, Roger Tolle. I met Roger 15 years ago, I think it was, back in Princeton, New Jersey, when I took my first Traeger level 1, and Roger was my teacher. So, Roger, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Good to see you both. Good morning, Anna Marie, too. Great to be online with you in this Zoom format. Yeah.
Thanks for taking the time for joining us today. I think we'd like to start with just tell us a little bit about what was happening in your life that moved you into the world of dance, first of all, and how you found yourself from there into the world of somatics and body work.
Yeah. It's probably kind of unlikely that I would have gone into a world of dance because I was not a dancer as a kid. I was kind of a pudgy, emotional, kind of, I'm going to say, distracted teenager, and a little bit overweight and not very mobile. But boy, did I have these inner desire to be expressive, and ended up in a theater program at a liberal arts college, and found there a field of study called physical theater that was really interesting. It's a kind of theater. This would have been back in the early 1970s. It was theater that was created by a group of actors collectively, so not from a script, but they would collectively uncover some kind of a dramatic narrative with the group of them through physical interaction. And that really fascinated me. Got me into movement, and I started taking some dance classes. I was terrible in those early dance classes, but eventually got a little bit better and started taking some like 3 times a week dance classes. And by the time I was a senior, I created a dance theater piece, or I could say a physical theater piece, for my senior thesis, and recorded it and made all these notes and got credit for it, which is great. And that then led me to being told by my dance teacher that, well, it'd be hard for me to actually have a dance career because I had started so late. But if I was really interested, I should go to the American Dance Festival. And they accepted me not because I knew how to dance, but because of my video that I showed them of the dance theater piece. And they said, oh, well, burgeoning choreographer, sure, he can come to the American dance field. That summer, I went from dancing 3 times a week for an hour and a half to dancing 7 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Wow.
My body went through a huge, like, exhausting. I was exhausted all the time, but I was also exhilarated. It was so much fun, and I was learning so much about myself as I did that. And that led to getting hired by a very small dance repertory company in Boston. They just needed a man, and they had some theatrical pieces in their repertory that they thought I could handle, even though I couldn't handle the dance technique. 4 years with Concert Dance Company in Boston, was also 4 years of experience dancing, studying, taking class every day or twice a day, dancing still 7 hours a day, and my body changed. And this is one of the things that in retrospect, I realize that taught me one of the central principles of somatics. The somatic therapy uh, model is that movement changes us.
Mm.
There's lots of things movement does for us. Awakens our body to ourselves, build body awareness, stimulates the nervous system in really wonderful and important ways for neuroplasticity. There's all kinds of ways in which the physical aspect of movement actually lets the joints lubricate themselves. As I heard one speaker recently say, motion is the lotion, right? We'll get back to that theme for a lot of my clients. And that in the process of developing different patterns of movement in dance classes and in learning these dances, my body had to learn to lay down different tissue gradually through repetition, day after day after day after day. My spine got longer. In that 4 years, I grew more than an inch and a half in height
Wow.
in my mid-20s and lost 15 pounds. So that I went from being a pudgy 23-year-old to a rather muscular and a little bit more elongated, still pretty short, but nonetheless a dancer, respectable dancer that could get good reviews and so on. And I moved from there into New York City, continued to work in the style that I really loved, which was mostly pioneered by Bill Evans, but based on some of the work of Jose Limon's technique. But I also studied with and then performed with Beverly Brown, who was one of the Hawkins technique lineage and taught dance in that style. She was working with breath and voice in her choreographic explorations, which harkened back to my physical theater explorations. And that's where my choreography was leading me, more that body voice theater, which she called her company and what then I ended up choreographing for myself. All of that, once I got to New York, led me in, and she brought various people to help us learn some other things. In fact, that's where I started learning from Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. The body mind centering took developmental movement with her, the body systems, fluids, organs, understanding nervous system from Bonnie back in the early 80s. Was introduced to Emily Conrad's work, Continuum, and did several long workshops with her through the 80s, the 80s, 1980s, right? We're talking about that period. While I was in my 30s, basically, I was like opening my body to a whole new realm. Also studied things like chakra energy balancing and food and healing and Oriental 5-element theory and shiatsu and dabbling, very much the dabbler, because at that point I was still mostly focused on being a choreographer, producing my dances in New York City. But these other inquiries were catching my attention. And one of them led to my noticing the little sign on a bulletin board that described a Traeger session that was being offered as part of some students' work. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Let me just do that. And, the fateful day, receiving that first session, and in the first 5 minutes of receiving that session, my whole body felt like a different person. And I felt like this was a new home. I had come home to myself, both in my body, a new sense of my body, which was very exciting, but also a startling sense that I had come to a new professional home. This is what I wanted to be able to learn how to do. Felt like I had all the skills and all the desires to get me into it. Took a training within a month, started practicing endlessly with all my dancers, on the floor. I would grab somebody's leg or take hold of somebody's arm or my dancers were, of course, my first subjects. And and through that evolution of of gradual getting more and more into doing trigger sessions, more continuum studies, even eventually studied more of the gyrotonics expansion system for my body to keep myself really open and alive. Um, on top of all of what Milton had taught, and I'd learned through the various people that had studied with him about mentastics, the somatic movement exploration system that for him was very clear and in his experience like be all and the full thing. And in my experience was, a particular kind or style of somatic movement education that I found fit me best. It's great and fit a lot of the people that I was working with. So there was a gradual shift over about 5 years where I built my Traeger practice little by little and danced with fewer other companies. I began to just sort of tail away some of my professional dance things. And I remember after doing a concert with my dance company in spring of 1988, I told my dancers, well, let's take a break for this summer. I have a lot of these Traeger workshops I want to be part of. I'm learning a lot there, and we'll come back in the fall and I'll start some new choreography. I've got a few ideas, but I need this summer to let them percolate and get better. And by the end of the summer, I was so into teaching introductory Traeger workshops, taking classes, and building a practice. My practice by that point had become, yeah, I don't know, at least 10 sessions a week. And as soon as I just admitted it, that I really was going to be in this practice and that I think that I was done with being a choreographer and part of that dance scene, I just let go. And within the next year, I built a full-time practice in Traeger. So,
That's fascinating. You actually took your career in dance and then went into an introspection of your own personal body and experienced the growth and then allowed yourself to expand into that whole thing and brought that experience into the dance community. That is fabulous. And New York
and
City, not a small stage.
not a small space. Yeah, right. Really, in that hub of all the best professional dancers. Part of what the evolution for me after I had taken Traeger classes was to start immediately teaching Mentastics. It was easy for me as a dance teacher to say, "Oh, I can bring these two things together," and I started teaching dance technique classes that I called effortless motion,
Mhm.
following Milton's inquiries around what could be easier, what could be lighter, what could be softer, and working with that as a technique for training professional dancers. That led more effectively, though, into teaching workshops once or twice a week for non dancers
Mhm.
on movement and transformation, a way to transform yourself, just
Mhm.
as my body had been transformed by dancing and then transformed by studying all these various somatic approaches. I wanted to help this group of non-professionals, just people who wanted to have fun on an evening, learn about themselves, develop more sensory awareness, self-awareness, do some explorations in touch that were safe and comfortable, but also exciting and new and interesting in their body experiences. And so did that for a number of years that built for me a clarity of how to help non-dancers, people who had not had all the dance technique and didn't have the intention to become professional dancers, learn to move fluidly with grace and ease, more comfortable in their bodies, learn also how to touch in a way that is received with pleasure by bodies, received gratefully, received by the tissue, by the structure, by the nervous system. Like, how do we touch so that that is a way of connecting with people rather than a kind of back and forth push-pull? And, some of the people in those movement workshops had personal intimate partners, and they would come back and say, oh, my sex life just got a whole lot better. So learning to touch with awareness is very useful for relationships. Or, the way that I'm treating my aging parents now feels like way richer, because I feel like now I can engage my hands and my presence with them in a way that their bodies receive helpfully, even as they're getting older.
That nurturing touch has a profound impact on nervous systems, both the giver and the receiver. That exchange is just really dynamic and powerful.
It is. Well, as we often say, and you probably have heard me say, when we are touching to listen. We are touching to receive, much more than to do or give or identify. We're not touching like palpation, the way a medical professional is taught to touch, looking for specific things. Another metaphor that I would use with those students is come in with your peripheral vision wide open. So actually, literally, now I understand this thing about, looking really intensely at something causes my energy field to narrow and get precise. But opening my sense of sight to my peripheral vision then includes me in the picture that I'm looking at. And so I can't be in that sort of allopathic, distanced relationship, that that idea of being objective, which I think is just contrived anyway, but it really becomes clear when I allow myself to stay in peripheral vision and see let the world come to me, and peripheral sensing in my hands similarly. I kinetic sensing in my body similarly. That when I open my internal kinetic sense to receiving the movement through me that my partner on the table is getting, it's way more interesting for me, and it includes me um, in that event. I'm not separate.
Sounds too like all of your personal experience with dabbling and choreography gave you that periphery approach to life in general, including yourself in the picture and seeing wherever you walk. I've been privileged to be in a few of your Mentastics classes, and they were phenomenal. And I just it just seems like that's your general approach. And just a little bit curious about how the other dancers received the work. I'm just kind of curious. It might have been new for them to receive touch. I don't know, or if massage and things like that were regularly part of the dance community at that time.
Let's see.
Or was that like
Several parts of
something
that
new?
question, Anne-Marie.
Yes, yes, yes. Of course, because it's me asking.
Of course, what part of my answer is, well, how did they receive my touch, right? That's different than just touch in general. But coming to the way dancers relate to touch, it's a full spectrum, because they are all different people. And many of the dancers that I worked with were not so interested in the touch explorations that I was interested in doing as part of the dancing. But when I'm choosing my own dancers for my own choreography, part of the auditioning, so to speak, is their comfort with doing partner work. Because I was always doing touch explorations as part of the choreography. different people, different combinations of people, sometimes duets, but sometimes it's just what we would now maybe more often call contact improvisation kind of things, leaning weight in and out. One of the crazy things in my early dancing experience up in Boston was that I got to learn the piece called Parabolas from the guys that developed it. If you know anything about that particular choreographic style, one of their signature things is the dancers as not so much focused on human interaction, relationships that would be human in scale. They became, because they were not dancers themselves creating that stuff. They were interested in phenomenon of dancers coming together to become other kinds of organisms. So in that particular piece, there were three guys, and together we glommed together. We landed on each other. We balanced on each other, changed our shapes together as a single organism, and learning about being in touch with another body to sense where their balance was shifting. Yeah, that was fascinating for my body, and I loved learning about that, and that was something I brought into a lot of my choreography too. So play with weight, understanding weight, and then the experience, as both of you know, the experience of Milton's work, Milton, who pioneered the importance and essence of sensing weight, what's happening with our weighted body in gravity. How do we work with that organically, naturally for a human structure, and how we can move. Yeah.
And feel that inside your body as you're moving through space, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's fabulous.
Teaching about weight and saying, yeah, there's two different aspects. There's letting go of your body weight, like letting your arm hang off of you, and then sensing your whole body weight moving around, and then the weight contact with the surface of the ground, or if you're on your hands and knees, on your knees and your hands, like what is that surface you're on, and how does your body weight give you that contact and that information about yourself?
And how does that translate into what's the weight of the client on the table and or the client if you're seated or playing with the weight of another human being and how that impacts everything too.
Right. And if we play with that, and I'll come back to my peripheral awareness invitation, I play with that by taking the weight of my client's arm or leg or head or belly or whatever part of their body, taking that weight through me to the ground. It's a really important theme in this work, so that my client feels safely held by Mother Earth when I engage my hands underneath their weight. That's a skill that requires a lot of practice. Concept makes some sense to most people, but the practice of it is a practice of unwinding all the other habits we have of how we touch and how we pick things up, and grasping reflex, which we needed when we were infants, but can get in our way if we're doing this kind of somatic work, because we don't want to
Sounds
work.
like Yeah, it sounds like too, you have to have built a really clear sense of your body in space and your body in relationship to weight and grounding. And so you can clearly delineate, this is me, this is them, this is how we are together, going back to your creating a third kind of thing when two people come together. It just seems
Yeah.
like it all fits together.
Yes, it does. And all of that stuff gets woven together. Now, I can talk about it now with a lot more clarity than I could then, right? Discovering that stuff, but not having good language for it was certainly part of the early machinations, the early explorations.
Fabulous.
That's part of what we're doing now, is trying to develop more language around some of these things that we all have been experiencing over time. And now we're hoping that this podcast is one of the ways that we can begin to educate the general public with language that's universally understood about somatic touch and about working with somatic touch and movement and all of that.
Yes. The collective languaging more, well, more out of its own silo of self-referencing language,
Uh-huh.
um, and out into a much broader field of shared language, and being very, very careful, as I try to be, about saving what I call the legacy language that I learned from those pioneers that I studied with. uh, Saving their language and saying this is what they called that, this is what they were experiencing. Today, I think it's more understandable to say this, that, or the other thing. Just as I did, I was talking about weight and about sensing it all the way through my structure, and had that wasn't so clear when I was studying. Nobody offered me that insight verbally when I was learning. I mean, collectively, our Traeger community and many of the other somatic lineages have this development process of the lineage itself, where it gets more and more clear by more and more people inquiring about it, more and more people questioning, well, what exactly do we mean here? And how do we exactly do that? And how does that work? And where are we going with this? Yeah. How is this like that other discipline? But also, how is it different from that other discipline?
Yeah. And to that end, we're also seeing science catching up to this. The fact that through touch, through the things that you were talking about earlier on, opening up new neural pathways in our brain and connecting to ourselves in different ways, this is a whole new science. And it's something that the medical community isn't really trained at. And we're bringing this thing into the medical model of helping people become alive inside their body. And on top of all that, with the overload because of the world that we're living in right now, with the amount of stress that we deal with, the amount of anxiety that comes down to us, we're also coming to a place that we start to contract in our bodies and thus lose real estate in our ability to move. So I find it so fascinating that you came up through the dance community with this thread of something that was relatively new. Only a few pioneers were out there working with the mind, body, spirit connection and tying it together. And it's now just starting to blossom 50 years later. It's fascinating.
Maybe the blossoming began even back then, Richard. But maybe it's just one of those uh, huh, beautiful flowering plants that has multiple blossoms over a long period of time, goes through maybe some periods of having dropped its made blossoming parts, but it's still growing and developing stronger roots. Um, the metaphor is nice, the blossoming idea. And each one of us as our own little blossom, each one of us with a practice, how we develop, and then the communities that we are part of, and the broader sense, as you just pointed to, like beginning to have language that we can speak to other disciplines with, and they understand. And part of that is certainly some of the new paradigms in uh, scientific exploration and research that allow science as a general inquiry, a style of inquiry, to begin to make sense of what people like us have been saying is our experienced truth in our
Mhm.
lives and in our work with our clients. It's our truth, and we have lots and lots of data over many years with thousands of practitioners doing the same experiments over and over again with their clients and coming up with the same kinds of results.
Mhm.
Um, it is essentially, we've been doing collectively a good piece of what's called the scientific process,
Right.
but
Exactly.
we haven't been documenting it as well as we are starting to do more of now. We get more people writing cogently, getting things down in black and white and words, even though that's so antithetical to the nature of this holistic, omnidirectional, lived experience. But, it's very human to want to write down that stuff and share it verbally with others, help others understand.
And there is and there is also something to the neurological connections between putting words on paper manually with your hand and how that integrates for the nervous system. There is something there that works within the nervous system when you're writing too. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that, of course, that reminds me I should probably spend more time doing actual writing with a pen,
writing or typing.
um,
It's
rather than
important.
typing into a computer. But that's a difficult thing.
It's really important, and that's really what we've done with the foundation. What we're doing is really trying to focus on research and education, because as we move further and further into this machine world that we're in, AI has taken over a lot of things, including the intake process from a doctor when you walk into their office about what path of treatment you're going to get. And if we don't have writing, we don't have case reports, we don't have research around the touch, the somatic touch exposure, and what impact it has had over years, we don't exist. And that is something we cannot allow to happen. This is a good point for us to
And
take
I
it. Go ahead, Anna Marie. Finish up at that point and then take us out because we're ready to move on.
All right, I'm sorry. I just wanted to reflect back to what Roger had said about, and in the process of doing the writing and the describing and the explaining to other people, not losing the words that were used by the founders of the work, not using the sense of what was used by those people, and not translating our meaning using someone else's language, but meeting someone else's language and trying to translate for them. And so that's kind of what I was hearing you say, Roger.
Yeah, that's true. And each of us has to be acknowledged as a translator of what we learned because it has to come through us. Um, so, certainly in the Traeger lineage, there's only one Milton Traeger. He's the only one who really does Traeger work. Um, but when it became an organization and we all became members of the organization, we own his name now, and that's a professional moniker. And that's fine. That's legal. That's appropriate that my work is referred to as Traeger out there in the professional world. Traeger Somatic Movement Education.
Well, this is a good point for us to start. Thank you for sharing. And we're going to invite our audience back for episode 2, when we're going to ask Roger to talk about his transformation from the dance world into the world of somatic touch therapy. So, Roger, thank you for joining us. And please come back for our next episode next week. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at MYBcast. We hope you found the stories inspiring. This series has been made possible by our hosts, our production team, and our guests, whose willingness to share their personal stories is vital to educating the public about the power of somatic touch. We're all contributing to creating positive change. Thanks to our sponsors, Mind Your Body, the Foundation for Somatic Touch, and Somatic Mindfulness. Find them on the web at myb.llc. foundationforsomatictouch.org, and somaticmindfulness.co. Please like, share, subscribe, and join us again for more interesting, compelling, and heartful stories.